By the late 80s and early 90s, the Walt Disney Company had finally begun to return to its former glory. After over 2 decades of stagnation following the death of Walt, they were turning out films that were both critically and financially successful and lived up to the Disney name, thanks to the new regime headed by Michael Eisner, Frank Wells, Roy E. Disney, and Jeffrey Katzenberg. But that wasn't the only area they were excelling at. They were also having great success with their newly formed television animation division, which were turning out shows that had not just engaging stories and characters, but also high quality animation that truly raised the standard for television animation as a whole. But all of this would lead up to their ultimate culmination, when in 1990, Disney premiered a syndicated 2-hour weekday afternoon block that would bring all of their shows together under one roof, which would become the Disney Afternoon. For 7 seasons, technically 9, but I'll bring that up later, the block showcased some of the best, for the most part anyway, and most popular animated shows that Walt Disney Television Animation ever made for weekday afternoons. But just where did the idea for creating the block come from, why did they go with the schedule structure they chose, and what ultimately led to the block's downfall? As always, all of these questions and more will be answered in this video. So with all that said, I'm the Media Nutso, and it's time to take a deep look back at the history behind the Disney Afternoon. Of course, before we actually get to talking about the Disney Afternoon, we first have to look at Disney's history and entry into television animation.
No time for stealing, Beagle Boy. We're making movies. Lights, camera, DuckTales.
It all goes back to the division's founding in 1984. Up until that time, Disney had never produced its own original animated television show, largely because Walt Disney himself felt that it was economically impossible and he refused to compromise the studio's signature high-quality animation. And he wasn't wrong in thinking that. Most animated shows at the time needed to produce anywhere from 13 to 26 episodes per season in a short time frame and on low budgets, so many shortcuts had to be taken. The only original animation Disney produced for television were the intro segments for the Mickey Mouse Club, wraparound segments for some episodes of the Disneyland TV series, which helped bridge together the various shorts that were showcased on the show, and later on, when it was revamped as Disney's Wonderful World of Color, some episodes featured the only Disney character created for television during that time, Ludwig von Drake. But all of this would change in 1984. When then newly appointed Disney CEO Michael Eisner made a big push to expand Disney to new areas it never ventured to before, which included finally getting the studio into television animation. So in November of 1984, Walt Disney Television Animation, or as it was first called, the Walt Disney Pictures Television Animation Group, was formed, with Gary Kreisel as the president and Michael Webster as senior vice president. Their goal was to shop their shows around to all the major markets, to the big networks, the Disney Channel, and in syndication, as well as making a significantly larger investment to produce their animated shows with much higher quality animation than what Filmation and Hanna-Barbera were putting out at the time. This was considered quite a risky venture, since as mentioned earlier, animated television shows were generally seen as low-cost investments. Also, one major caveat was that the team wasn't allowed to use any of the main Disney characters so as not to cheapen their image. Thus, for the division's first couple of years, they would create shows with original characters. During a meeting at Eisner's home, he pitched them 2 ideas for animated shows. One was based on the gummy bear candies that his kids loved, which many thought sounded crazy, and another was based around the concept of mixing 2 animals together into one. The team proceeded forward with those ideas and were ultimately developed into Disney's first 2 original animated series, The Wuzzles, created by Fred Wolf, which follows the adventures of the eponymous creatures living on the Isle of Wuz, and Adventures of the Gummy Bears, created by Jim Magan, which is set in a medieval land and centers on 6 gummy bears, Cubby, Sunny, Gruffy, Zoomy, Tummy, and Grammy, that live in a secret underground settlement in the Kingdom of Dunwin, and follows their exploits as they aid some of their human allies and thwart the various evil plans of Duke Igthorn. Both shows premiered on CBS and NBC respectively on Saturday, September 14, 1985. The risk paid off very well, as Gummy Bears became a major hit for Disney. But the same couldn't be said for The Wuzzles, as it ran for only 13 episodes, both due to low ratings and the death of voice actor Bill Scott. The next year, Disney took a different approach for what was planned to be their third animated series, Fluffy Dogs, loosely based on the children's book of the same name, with the 1-hour special acting as the pilot for the series. It premiered on ABC on November 27, 1986, and the special didn't do all that well, only scoring a 5.3 rating and 10 share, resulting in the show getting cancelled, though the special later reran on August 30, 1987. However, they would make their biggest gamble yet with their next series, DuckTales. Developed by Jim Magan, Ted Anasty, and Patsy Cameron, and based on the Carl Barks Don Rosa's Uncle Scrooge comics, it followed the adventures of Scrooge McDuck and Donald's nephews, Huey, Dewey, and Louie, as they globetrot in search of rare and valuable treasures, while also dealing with many of Scrooge's arch enemies along the way. Disney invested $20 million into making the show, which was one of their riskiest endeavors yet. But they had made a plan where instead of having it broadcast on one of the big 3 networks, Disney decided to release it in syndication, as well as make their money back through a 2.5-3.5 ad split. When DuckTales officially premiered in syndication on September 18, 1987 with the 5-part story, The Treasure of the Golden Suns, it wasn't just a big hit, it was a gigantic hit. In fact, it was the #1 animated show in syndication for 104 straight weeks, so you better believe Disney's venture paid off very well. That was followed up by The New Adventures of Winnie the Pooh debuting on ABC on November 12, 1988, which also went on to become another big hit. Then the following year, after 4 seasons on NBC, Gummy Bears was moved over to ABC, where it premiered its 5th season on September 9, 1989, and was paired up with New Adventures of Winnie the Pooh in a 1-hour block called The Gummy Bears Winnie the Pooh Hour. And now, we're finally getting to the point where the genesis of the Disney afternoon comes in. 6 days later, on September 15, Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers premiered in syndication with the 5-part story Rescue Rangers to the Rescue, and it would end up being an enormous success. So much so, it unseated DuckTales from the #1 spot, which still held a respectable #2 in the syndication ratings. Speaking of, both shows were played together as part of a 1-hour block, which of course proved to be quite successful. So after seeing the success of that 1-hour block, Disney decided to expand it into 2 hours, with 2 more shows to be added in to round it all out. They even concocted an unprecedented $100 million ad campaign for its premiere, with contests, cross-promotions, an extensive on-air package, and even through their own magazine, Disney Adventures. So, after all of that extensive promotion, on September 10, 1990, the Disney Afternoon made its big syndication debut. So, now that we've finally covered all of that history, it's finally time to see just what this block had to offer.
Don't go away. The Disney Afternoon will be right back. Stay tuned for more fun on the Disney Afternoon.
For the inaugural premiere season, in addition to DuckTales and Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers, they added Adventures of the Gummy Bears and the only new series that season, TaleSpin. So let's kick things off with the first in the group, Adventures of the Gummy Bears. I already brought up much of its history in the previous section, so I won't repeat myself here. I will say though that despite it being the oldest show in the bunch, it makes total sense why it was chosen to join the block. It was Walt Disney Television Animation's first majorly successful animated series. Plus, its fantasy adventure setting made it a perfect fit for the block, and the fact that it was popular enough to make it to 65 episodes is pretty impressive. Next up, we have DuckTales. Now, what's interesting about the show at the beginning is even though they had a moratorium on featuring any of the main Disney characters in any of their shows, for DuckTales, they worked around it by having Donald make sporadic appearances in some episodes, mainly in the first season, and inventing the character of Launchpad McQuack to fill in Donald's place. Also, because of the show's immense success, it led Disney to making the feature film DuckTales the Movie, Treasure of the Lost Lamp, released on August 3rd, 1990, over a month before the Disney Afternoon had premiered. It was also notably the first Disney animated show to make it to 100 episodes, which wouldn't happen again until 2 decades later with Phineas and Ferb. Then we've got Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers. Since I didn't give the series synopsis in the previous section, I might as well bring it up here. Created by Tad Stones and Alan Zaslov, the show is all about Chip and Dale along with their friends Gadget Hack Wrench, Zipper, and Monterey Jack as they run a detective agency where they deal with crimes normally seen as too small for regular police, which usually involves other animals as their clients. Now, the show actually has quite an interesting backstory. When Tad Stones first came up with the idea for the show, it originally wasn't going to feature Chip and Dale. Instead, it was initially based on the Rescuers, but the idea was rejected as Walt Disney Feature Animation already had a sequel in production, which became The Rescuers Down Under. So Stones came up with another concept under the working title Metro Mice, which would have starred a mouse named Kit Colby, and the team would have consisted of a chameleon, a cricket, and early versions of Gadget, Monterey Jack, and Zipper. When Stones pitched the idea to Jeffrey Katzenberg and Michael Eisner, they both loved the idea, except for one aspect. They weren't too keen on the character of Kit. So, at Eisner's suggestion, Kit was replaced by Chip and Dale in order to give the show some established Disney characters to work with. Kit's main wardrobe was given to Chip, while Dale wore a Hawaiian shirt reminiscent of the one worn by Thomas Magnum in Magnum P.I. Another notable tidbit: where in the classic shorts the duo's dialogue was illegible, in the show they were a lot more vocal, so their dialogue had to be much clearer for the audience to follow along, but still had their vocal pitch sped up. Finally, we have TaleSpin. Created by Jim Megan and Alan Zaslov, the series centers on Baloo Bear, who runs a cargo air service called Hire for Hire alongside Rebecca Cunningham, her daughter Molly, and an orphan former air pirate Kid Cloudkicker, who forms a fatherly bond with Baloo and becomes his navigator. Together, they go on many adventures via their cargo plane, the Sea Dug, and deal with various obstacles, be they air pirates or more out there scenarios. Originally, Disney had commissioned Megan and Zaslov to create a 30-minute animated series without any requirements on what it should be about. Megan came up with the idea of having the story be about Baloo from the Jungle Book, which would have been recently re-released to theaters at the time. He was also inspired by the 1982 series Tales of the Gold Monkey, specifically the element of having Baloo working for an air cargo delivery service. To add dramatic tension to the show, they decided to incorporate one element from the Jungle Book, that being the father-son dynamic for Baloo and Kit. There were other shows and movies the duo took inspiration from, including basing the character of Rebecca off of Rebecca Howe from Cheers. Having the cast fighting air pirates was lifted from the Hayao Miyazaki manga Hikote Jayadai, I apologize if I mispronounced that. Having one of the main locations being a neutral zone, which included Cape Suzette and Louis's place, where they obviously added Louis, was inspired by Casablanca, and Shere Khan wasn't added into the show until later on in development. Interestingly, they initially were going to have Phil Harris reprise his role of Baloo. However, by then, Harris was 85 years old and had lost some of his comedic timing. Not to mention, he was chauffeured from his home for each recording session. No, I didn't make that last bit up. So they ended up scrapping all of Harris's recordings and ended up hiring Ed Gilbert to take over the role. As for the animation, while a majority of it was outsourced like all of their other shows, TaleSpin is noted to be the first animated TV series to utilize CGI, mainly to animate the sea duck and all the other planes when in flight, since it would have been both difficult and prohibitively expensive to hand draw the planes doing all those twists and turns and loop-de-loops they perform in the air, though there were moments where they were actually hand drawn. And in case you were wondering, the computer they used to animate on was a Commodore Amiga 2000. Oh, and before anyone thinks I forgot to mention this, I'll mention it here. Every show starting with DuckTales was previewed on the Disney Channel months before their respective official premieres. Funny enough, despite this being the block's inaugural season, with the exception of TaleSpin, many of their shows didn't have large episode orders. Chip and Dale only had 5 episodes for its final season, while Gummy Bears had 19 and DuckTales had 7, 3 of which were held over from the previous season. That's because they were about to hit the 65 episode threshold, except for DuckTales, as that was gonna hit 100 episodes, which was the minimum needed to rerun each show in circulation for 13 weeks. That, and Disney felt that was enough episodes to produce for each show. Within a few weeks of its premiere, the Disney Afternoon started off very strong. While the block's official numbers were never disclosed, it's safe to say that it was a major rating success. After the block took off, a plan Disney implemented going forward was a special rotation plan, where they would rotate the oldest show out with the newest one and move the other 3 shows up a half hour earlier. This would go into effect during the next season. For the 1991 and 1992 season, Gummy Bears was removed from the block, and in its place was the next new series, Darkwing Duck, which premiered on September 6, 1991. Created by Tad Stones, the series centers on the titular superhero with the aid of Launchpad McQuack, who was previously in DuckTales, and his adopted daughter Goslin, as they go about protecting the city of St. Canard from the various evildoers who try to take over the city, while Darkwing also has to balance being a good father to Goslin under his mild-mannered civilian identity, Drake Mallard. He just has one major flaw. He has a huge ego and a thirst for fame and attention that can sometimes get in the way of him doing the right thing and his crime fighting. Believe it or not, the show was developed as a last-minute replacement, as the original pitch was for a revival to Rocky and Bullwinkle called The Secret Adventures of Bullwinkle, which would have been a modern spin on the classic Bullwinkle show. But that idea was scrapped after Stones and Michael Peraza Jr. found out Disney didn't own the rights to the characters, but rather just the home video rights to the series. Initially, it was developed under the name Double O Duck, which was inspired by 2 episodes of DuckTales, Double O Duck, where Launchpad is a secret agent, and The Masked Mallard, where Scrooge becomes a vigilante superhero. So Tad Stones was tapped to create the series based on this premise, as one of the executives liked the title, given it was a spoof of James Bond. And that's where they hit a snag. It turned out the Broccoli family owned the Double O name, so they had to think of a new one, which eventually became Darkwing Duck. Other elements, like his wardrobe, which was originally a white tuxedo and a red domino mask, were also changed. And Darkwing coming up with new catchphrases every time he introduces himself were ad-libbed by Jim Cummings during production. Also, contrary to popular belief, Darkwing Duck is not a spin-off of DuckTales. Despite some characters like Launchpad and Gizmo Duck appearing in it, the show is set in its own separate universe. That, and the fact that duck characters have human-like tongues as opposed to duck ones, is a dead giveaway. Another notable tidbit is that it was shown simultaneously on both the Disney Afternoon and ABC Saturday mornings. Also, where most of the shows of the Disney Afternoon featured established characters, Darkwing Duck was the first Disney Afternoon series to have a mostly original cast, as well as being the first series to have more emphasis on the action than the adventure, and the first to be a genre parody, which in this case was Pulp Hero.
Hey, it's Santa's sleigh! He's here! He's here! Uh-oh. Look what I found!
Tut-tut, nothing to fear. What the? That fiendish Tuscanini wants to spoil Halloween for everyone!
Dad!
Prepare to suck gas, evildoer!
Chill out, Duck Guy. Great costumes, huh?
I knew that.
For the 1992 and 1993 season, DuckTales was taken off the block, and the new series to make its premiere was Goof Troop on September 5th. Created by Robert Taylor and Michael Peraza Jr., and inspired by the 1950s Goofy shorts where he was a domesticated father, the series is about Goofy and his son Max moving back to Goofy's hometown of Spoonerville, where they end up living next door to Goofy's old high school mate Pete and his family, consisting of Peg, Pistol, and PJ, who becomes Max's best friend, and they all get themselves into some crazy, wacky, and sometimes out there shenanigans. Now, some of you may wonder why the series is called Goof Troop despite there not being an actual troop in the show. Well, it was initially conceived as Goofy Troopers, where Goofy was to have been the head scoutmaster of a troop of young scouts, which wasn't a bad premise, but it proved to be pretty limiting to use in every episode. Then, when Peraza came on board to do some concept art, the creative executive who was in charge of the project had pitched several ideas that featured Goofy, including him being the captain of a fire department, a detective, and a swashbuckling hero, all of which were scrapped. It also didn't help that they didn't have a strong supporting cast, one of which included, and I'm not making this up, alien baby dragons with wings and a large gorilla. His next idea, inspired by Who Framed Roger Rabbit, was to put Goofy in Toontown where he beat the driver of an SUV, though it was at first Benny the Cab, but Peraza had some reservations on it. After all, why would you want to put Goofy into an already zany world? It would have made the premise feel pretty redundant. After that, Peraza was contacted by Gary Kreisel checking in on the project's progress, and since he had a good relationship with Kreisel, he gave his honest thoughts on why the project wasn't working, to which Kreisel agreed and then asked him what would he do. So Peraza proceeded to flesh out his idea for the show, told it to Kreisel, and he absolutely loved it. Thus, he told Peraza to move forward with his idea. Once all of that was settled, Peraza was unsure if he could pull it off. That was until Robert Taylor was brought on to be the producer. Taylor liked Peraza's concept, and he was happy he got to work with Taylor. Peraza also came up with Pete being Goofy's next door neighbor, his wife Peg, and their two kids, his daughter Pistol, which on a side note, both names are references to Pete's previous names, Pegleg Pete and Pistol Packin' Pete, and his son PJ. After getting the thumbs up on his setups, Peraza and the rest of the team went in with their pitch to the executives, who gave it the green light to series, and the rest is history. One aspect that helped set the show apart is that in addition to being the first series to showcase one of the main Disney characters in a major role, where every show before was set in a timeless fantasy world or sometime in the past, or in the case of Darkwing Duck, a comic book world, Goof Troop was the first Disney animated series to be set in the then current modern times. Also, like with Darkwing Duck, the series was shown simultaneously on ABC's Saturday mornings. Oh, and I'd be remiss if I forgot to mention that the series' success led to Disney making the animated feature a Goofy movie and its direct-to-video sequel an extremely Goofy movie. For the 1993 and 1994 season, Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers left the block, and on September 4th, 1993, Bonkers made its block debut. The series is about Bonkers D. Bobcat, a cartoon star who has washed out of show business after his show gets cancelled and ends up becoming a cop after rescuing Donald Duck. He ends up becoming the junior partner to Detective Lucky Bickel, which turns out to be ironic as Lucky hates tunes, but he eventually grows a fondness for Bonkers. Together, they solve crimes happening in the Hollywood area, but are not helped by Bonkers' antics, which can end up ruining certain missions, but also somehow end up helping out. But then, after being offered a job at the FBI, Lucky moves away and Bonkers is now partnered up with Officer Miranda Wright, who is a lot more tolerant of Bonkers' antics than Lucky was. Okay, let's get this old chestnut out of the way first. Contrary to popular belief, Bonkers was never originally intended to be a spin-off of Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Sure, the title character was inspired by Roger Rabbit, as well as the Toontown in the show taking influence from that film, but it was always meant to be its own thing. With that said, the show's production history was quite the tumultuous one. Initially produced by Dwayne Capizzi in his first producing role, Greg Weisman, and Robert Hathcock, it was originally slated for the usual 65 episodes, with Miranda Wright being Barker's partner the whole time. However, when the first batch of episodes came back to the studio, they turned out to be less than stellar by Disney standards. As a result, the original team was let go and the series was overhauled by a new team headed by Robert Taylor, though 19 of the original ordered episodes did eventually make it to air as being set after the Lucky episodes. Meanwhile, later in production, it was decided to create a series of shorts that showed what Bonker's in-universe show was like before he became a cop. Both the character and the shorts first debuted in the anthology series Raw Tunage as the segment He's Bonkers, which premiered on CBS a year earlier on September 19, 1992, though one short, Pedal to the Metal, was released in theaters with the movie Three Ninjas. Later on, those 12 shorts were packaged together as 4 compilation episodes of the main series. Also, the series was originally going to be called Toon Cop, but had to be changed both because naming the show after the main character worked better with kids, and to avoid any potential conflict with Steven Spielberg over the use of the word toon. Also interestingly, before they landed on Jim Cummings to voice Bonkers, Matt Frewer and Jim Carrey had also auditioned to do the voice. Boy, just imagine how those would have played out. By the beginning of the 1994 and 1995 season, TaleSpin was taken off the block, and with it, the last of the original 4 shows that kicked off the block were gone. Though it is worth mentioning that when TaleSpin, DuckTales, and Chip and Dale left the block, they continued to play in syndication outside of it up until 1995, when they, along with Darkwing Duck, began airing on the Disney Channel as part of a block called, well, The Block Party, which had a similar script schedule to the Disney Afternoon. But getting back to the block, that wasn't the only change in store for this season. The block underwent a radical makeover, as the original intro and bumpers were phased out in favor of bumpers that were, let's just say, reflective of the times, in an attempt to compete with Fox Kids, which by that point was dominating in the ratings.
Stay tuned for more fun on the Disney Afternoon. Stay tuned. The Disney Afternoon will return.
Don't go away. The Disney Afternoon will be right back after this. Stay tuned. TDA will be right back.
They also did away with the whole rotating new and old shows in and out strategy, and the block was now a mix of new and old shows. And for the end credits, they gave shoutouts to different cities across the US. As for the shows, Bonkers, Goof Troop, and Darkwing Duck continued on, and were joined by Aladdin the series on September 5th, which was also airing on CBS Saturday mornings. Produced by Alan Zaslav and Tad Stones, it was set after the events of The Return of Jafar, though ironically the episodes previewed on the Disney Channel aired 4 months before that film was released, and follows Aladdin, who is now engaged to Princess Jasmine, as they embark on various adventures both in and outside the city of Agrabah. Most of the cast from the movie returned to reprise their roles, with the exceptions of Robin Williams, who was replaced by Dan Castellaneta as the genie, and Douglas Seal replacing Val Betton as the Sultan. Then, a month later, came Gargoyles on October 24th. Created by Greg Weisman and Michael Reeves, it tells the story of a gargoyle clan who lived in a castle in Scotland. After being betrayed and killed by the humans they swore to protect, the remaining members were cursed to a deep sleep until the castle rises above the clouds. 1,000 years later, after the castle was purchased by David Xanatos and reconstructed at his skyscraper of the Erie Building in New York, the gargoyles awaken once more and have to adjust to their new surroundings, with the help of police officer Elisa Maza, who becomes a valuable ally. Reeves had written the first 6 episodes of the show and served as the primary head writer and story editor for the show's first 2 seasons, while Weisman brought in much of the show's mythology, folklore, and historical elements. Weisman also based the partnership between Goliath and Elisa off of the partnership of Bonkers and Miranda Wright. though not nearly as chaotic as the former was. The first season was developed on a sliding schedule, where each phase of development, writing, storyboarding, and animating, was given a 10-month period with some significant overlap time. Once the first season was in the can, the team asked to have the series picked up for another 13-episode season even before the first season had premiered, which Disney agreed to let them produce 6 more episodes. But when the show ended up taking off both in ratings and toy sales, they were instead asked to produce 52 episodes in order to run the show daily, which the team was not equipped for, considering their production method and the lack of timing to get those episodes out, but Disney wouldn't budge from that order. So their team was expanded fourfold, which involved bringing on more writers and having the role of story editor being handled on a rotating basis. At one point, Wiseman had many discussions with Michael Eisner about having Gargoyles be a starting point for a Disney action-oriented universe in the same way Warner Bros. Had DC Comics, but those plans were eventually scrapped following the resignation of Jeffrey Katzenberg and also Gary Kreisel and Bruce Cranston, who were both the show's biggest supporters. That, along with the show being preempted by the extensive coverage of the O.J. Simpson trial and being overshadowed by Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. Initially, the show was meant to conclude at the end of its second season, but was then unexpectedly picked up for a shorter third season, which got moved over to ABC Saturday mornings, but that's a whole other story. Well, enough on that. On January 2nd, 1995, the blog saw the premiere of the Schnookums and Me Funny Cartoon Show. Created by Bill Kopp, it's an anthology series broken up into 3 segments. Schnookums and Meat, which are about the titular cat and dog getting into all sorts of hijinks, Pith Possum's Super Dynamic Possum of Tomorrow, a spoof of Batman that starred Pith Possum and his sidekick Obadiah the Wonder Raccoon fighting crime in Possum City, and Tex Tinstar, the Best of the West, an obvious Wild West spoof about the cowboy Tex Tinstar, his horse Hero Boy, and their friends Smelly Deputy Chafe, Percy Lace Daisy, and Floyd the Insane Rattlesnake causing trouble while going after a group of outlaws known as the Wrong Riders. There isn't much on the making of the show out there, so this'll be a shorter segment. Anyways, the idea to do a series centered around a cat and dog was pitched by Greg Wiseman, as he likely wanted to have another comedy series on the block. Schnookums and Me had originally begun as a segment on Marsupilami, which itself was a spin-off of Raw Tunage. It was also the shortest-lived show on the whole block, only running until March 27th. What's funny about this is that the show actually performed decently well, scoring some pretty good ratings among kids and even teens, which should have been good enough to get it renewed for a second season, but for whatever reason, Disney chose not to. Now, obviously, the show has been compared to Ren and Stimpy and has even been called a ripoff of that show, but this really wasn't the case. The show was more inspired by the works of Tex Avery. That, and Disney pushed it to be wackier and edgier than their other shows at the time. What didn't help with the Ren and Stimpy comparisons was that they hired many former Ren and Stimpy artists to work on the show, and at one point, Disney was going to contract Carbuncle Cartoons to do the animation, but turned them down due to them not willing to spend the same amount of money they got from Spumco. One other tidbit, there was going to be an episode that would have spooked Animaniacs called The Wacky Kookyaks, but was shot down because Disney didn't think it was a good idea. Who knows how that episode would have turned out, but it was probably the right call. Interestingly, unlike the other series, neither one started off with 65 episodes right off the bat, but instead only 13 episodes. As a result, they had to share the same time slot, with Schnookums and Meat running on Mondays, while Gargoyles aired on Fridays, with Bonkers airing for the rest of the week. For the 1995 and 1996 season, Schnookums and Meat was taken off, and only one new show premiered on the block, The Lion King's Timon and Pumbaa on September 8th, which later premiered on CBS on September 16th, making it the last Disney animated show to air on that network. Set in an alternate continuity from the movie, the series follows Timon and Pumbaa going on various adventures in Africa and across the world. Whether it's finding food, escaping danger, or just having fun, they do so while still going by their Hakuna Matata lifestyle. The show also had episodes centered on Rafiki and the Hyenas in their own segments, Rafiki Fables and the Laughing Hyenas. The series was first officially announced on January 24, 1995. It came about because Gary Kreisel found Timon and Pumbaa were the best comedy duo to hit the scene in quite a long time, and thought they had the potential to be just as great a comedy duo as Abbott and Costello. So, Bob's Gangaway and Tony Craig were brought on as the show's supervising producers. Early on, it was decided that rather than recreating the tone of the movie, it would instead be more like a Tex Avery cartoon. Gangaway and Craig also wanted to expand on Timon and Pumbaa's personalities as a comedy team, as well as not keeping them secluded to the Serengeti and allowing them to explore the world and meet all sorts of different animals. Once the series began production, what the team did was peg down what animal or situation Timon and Pumbaa got themselves into, then they'd use a which animals live where atlas to find which country each episode should be set in. Gangaway and writer Kevin Campbell also made a huge list of puns using country names. When the series first began airing, they initially got Nathan Lane to reprise his role of Timon for 10 episodes, but was then replaced by Quentin Flynn for the rest of the first season. Then, for season 2 onward, Kevin Shawn took over the voice. As I mentioned earlier, Gargoyle's second season was ordered for 52 episodes and had its time slot expanded. So during this season, it played Monday through Thursday, while Timon and Pumbaa aired on Friday. At the start of the 1996 and 1997 season, the block underwent a second makeover, with new bumpers and a new ending segment called the Disney Afternoons, with the news anchor played by Canadian voice actor Steve Mackle. As for the shows, both Goof Troop and Bonkers were dropped from the block, with Gargoyles, Aladdin, Timon and Pumbaa, and Darkwing Duck remaining, making the latter the oldest and longest running show on the block. As for the new shows, 2 of them made their premiere, Quack Pack on September 3rd, and Mighty Ducks the Animated Series on September 6th, which also premiered on ABC Saturday mornings. For Quack Pack, which was created by Toby Shelton and Kevin Hobbs, it was about Donald Duck working as a cameraman along with Daisy, who is the reporter for the show What in the World. And they, along with Huey, Dewey, and Louie, who are now in their teens and reflect some of the trends of the time, travel across the globe seeking any noteworthy news stories, along with dealing with some everyday problems. When looking for inspiration for the show, Shelton and Hobbs looked to the classic Donald Duck cartoons, where Shelton noted that Donald mostly interacted with humans, so it was decided to incorporate humans into the show, firmly establishing that it's set in a different universe from DuckTales. This is why, despite their hometown being Duckburg, there's no mention of Scrooge McDuck or any of the characters or events from that show. Initially, the show was going to be called Duck Days, but was changed midway through production, though there are some references to that original title in the theme song. The series was notable for marking the first time the nephews had 3 distinct voices and personalities. How they were executed, though, is subjective. Also, yes, obviously Quack Pack was made to try and replicate the success of Goof Troop. As for Mighty Ducks, which was created by Marty Eisenberg, Robert N. Skur, and David Wise, it is very loosely based on the live-action film trilogy of the same name. How loose are we talking? The only connections to the films are the hockey theme and the team name the Anaheim Ducks. Otherwise, it's a completely different entity set in its own universe, centered on a team of 6 humanoid ducks from the planet Puckworld, where they treat hockey as a full-on lifestyle in another dimension, attempting to free their planet from an alien race known as Saurians. When the Saurians attempt to escape through an interdimensional portal, the ducks follow them in. However, both end up entering a different dimension and landing on Earth, specifically in Anaheim, California. From there, the Ducks meet a human named Phil Palmfinger, who becomes their manager and makes them an official hockey team, while they also continue their battle with Lord Dragonus and the Saurians. Unfortunately, there's really not a lot of behind the scenes information on the show, so I'll make up for it by talking about some interesting trivia. While the show very much deviates from the original films, there are some aspects that were lifted from the actual team. Wild Wing's name was taken from the team mascot. The team colors were the real team's actual colors of the time, even including the main duck emblem on their uniforms, and the main arena they play in, the Pond, was based on the Arrowhead Pond of Anaheim, which is now called the Honda Center. Also, much of the hockey shown in the series is accurate to the actual gameplay. One other bit, the character of Mallory was originally going to be blonde. Okay, we better address this. Yes, Disney was attempting to dip back into the duck well, given this and Quack Pat premiered in the same year, and it was attempting to capitalize on the whole radical trend of the time, even going as far as having David Wise, who was one of the main writers and story editor on the original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles cartoon, as one of the creators and writers. Though funny enough, the show premiered just as the original Ninja Turtles was airing its final season on CBS. Or not, depending on the affiliate. Like with the previous season, 3 shows shared one time slot, with Timon and Pumbaa airing on Mondays, Quack Pack Tuesdays through Thursdays, and Mighty Ducks on Fridays. But not even those shows could help keep the Disney afternoon afloat. Even before those shows premiered, the block had been suffering a significant decline in ratings and ad revenue, thanks mainly to the rise of Cartoon Network and Nickelodeon, and UPN and the WB having their own children's programming blocks. So Disney decided to revamp the block and made an agreement with the Leo Burnett agency to market and distribute it for the next 2 seasons, along with forming a partnership with them and Kellogg's, who have been one of the Disney Afternoon's major sponsors. And so, on September 1st, 1997, the new revamped block made its debut. The Disney Afternoon name was dropped and it was never given an official new name, though it was internally called the Disney Kellogg's Alliance, and the block was cut down to 90 minutes. As for the shows, for the 1997 and 1998 season, Timon and Pumbaa, Gargoyles, Aladdin, and Darkwing Duck were officially dropped, and the block premiered with 101 Dalmatians the series, which also premiered on Disney's One Saturday Morning 12 days later on September 13th. Developed by Jim Jenkins and David Campbell, who also served as executive producers alongside Bob's Gangaway and Tony Craig, the series centers on 3 puppies, Lucky, Rolly, and Catpig, along with their family on the Dealey farm in England. Along with their friend Spot, a chicken who wants to be a dog and become a member of the Bark Brigade, they get into many crazy escapades and adventures on their farm and dealing with the evil Cruella de Vil. When developing the series, Gangaway felt that both the 1961 and 1996 films were more about the human characters than the dogs, so they wanted to make the series more about the puppies' individual personalities. They also had to expand on Cruella in order to make her more of a greedy character, which proved to be pretty daunting given, Cruella is seen as one of Disney's greatest villains. For the overall look of the show, the producers decided to give it a very stylized look, different from the 1961 film by utilizing a thick and thin line approach, which Gangaway and Craig previously used on another show they did, Two Stupid Dogs at Hanna-Barbera. The block also reran Mighty Ducks and Quack Pack in an interchangeable slot, and to fill in the third one, they added reruns of DuckTales. By the 1998-1999 season, 101 Dalmatians the series concluded its run, and was replaced by Hercules the Animated Series on August 31st. Developed by Tad Stones, the series served as an interquel to the movie, taking place during Hercules' formative training years with training under his personal trainer Phil, while also attending Prometheus Academy with his friends Cassandra and Icarus, and having to navigate everyday life as a demigod. When the Hercules movie was being made, directors John Musker and Ron Clements jokingly told Stones that they were doing a pilot for a series. When the show actually began development, it was decided that the team could capture the film's irreverence more easily by having it set within the events of the film. Stones even said that, by ignoring continuity and trying to stay true to the elements of humor and adventure in the film, we came up with a much stronger series that really stands on its own. As most of the cast from the film signed on to reprise their roles, and especially James Woods as Hades, many big-name actors expressed interest in taking part of the show. As a result, over 150 celebrities appeared in the series. including but not limited to Merv Griffin, Jennifer Love Hewitt, David Hyde Pierce, and Wink Martindale. As the block wore on, it was very apparent that it was well past its glory days. Mind you, the shows on it weren't bad, but it wasn't garnering as much attention as it did in its prime. However, by mid-1999, none of this would matter as the block's run was about to draw to a close. Around that time, Disney had arranged a deal with UPN to program a brand new children's programming block to replace their floundering UPN Kids, which would eventually become Disney's 1-2. That and Disney had formed a new cable channel, Toon Disney, in 1998, where they could air their older animated content 24/7. And so, in September of 1999, the Disney-Kellogg's alliance came to an end and Disney's 1-2 made its big premiere on September 6th. Yes, it was sad to see it come to an end, but it was probably for the best in the long run. To put it bluntly, the syndicated television landscape had changed a lot in 9 years, with new regulations being implemented, the stronger competition from some of the network kids blocks, and from the big children's cable networks. With that said though, the block had an incredible run, did a great job at bringing a lot of memorable Disney animated shows, and helped raise the standard of what television animation as a whole could be. All in all, the Disney Afternoon was a successful and impactful animated block. It helped breathe new energy into the television animation landscape, brought viewers a lot of fun and creative magic, and adventures and experiences viewers would never forget for years to come. It's because of all that why, even 35 years later, a lot of people fondly look back at this block and all of the shows it brought to the table. I hope that you all enjoyed the video and that it gave you a lot of great and intriguing insight into the history of this block. If you liked what you watched, please be sure to leave a like on the video, subscribe to my channel, and comment your thoughts down below. With that said, did you grow up with the Disney Afternoon? And even if you didn't, what were your favorite shows from the block? Until next time, this is Media Nutso saying, thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.